Thursday morning, and of course, on a Thursday morning, it's time for another edition of the World Edition. Steve Rao is doing his whole political thing and all along those lines, but we've got a number of things taking place in the world. And of course, we do have a guest who comes from the author space as well as the space of dealing with grief and all along those lines. And we'll be getting to their story in a little bit as well. But tensions are escalating between Canada and India over the killing of the outspoken Sikh leader, and India has suspended visas for Canadians as that whole fight continues. And it definitely looks like those visas are being suspended for Canadian nationals. So that is something that is going on and all along those lines. And of course, we do have the war going on between Russia and Ukraine, and that is continuing to go on as well. So definitely Russia is striking Ukraine ahead of the Zelensky Biden meeting, and that is something that's going on in that part of the world. And the definitely we're seeing other things that are taking place in that way, and we'll get to those as well. And once a refugee herself, the woman hoping to be the next Dutch prime minister is vowing to tighten borders. So she is definitely seeing her party, the Dutch Farmers Party, gain popularity ahead of those November elections. So that is something that we're seeing in that part of the world. And three South African Navy personnel died after they were swept off of a submarine deck doing supply operations. So that is something that we are seeing in that space. There looks like 7 were swept off the submarine deck, but 3 of them have passed away. And this was definitely a freak submarine incident that took place in the sea and all along those lines. Prime Minister Sunak is relaxing his UK climate commitments, so that is something else we're seeing. And the looks like a lot of folks are paying attention to what some folks are saying is a U-turn on several UK net zero policies. So that is something else that we're seeing in the news. And the UN leaders are railing against emissions as swarms of gas guzzling SUVs descend on the city. So UN chief calling for climate change action as humanity has opened the gates of hell. And that is what he said at the climate summit and all along those lines. And US and China aren't invited to speak at the UN Climate Action Summit either. And in the news going on with Ukraine, Poland says it will stop arming Ukraine. It says it's no longer going to longer be supplying weapons to Ukraine amid their fight over grain. So grain imports has led Poland to saying that they will not be supplying grain, not supplying aid whatsoever, and all in that space. And apparently, Joe Biden is at another one of those blunders because apparently he walked into a flag and then appeared to anger the Brazilian president with his handshake. And that was something that was going on as well. And apparently, Brazil's Lula and Ukraine's Zelensky understand each other after they had their meeting as well. But it definitely looks like Joe Biden forgot to shake hands with the Brazilian president in an awkward gaffe. So that is something else that we're seeing. And the Brazilian Lula is calling IMF and the World Bank part of the problem. And of course, since he's part of it, we knew that he would probably be pitching BRICS as a alternative. And that is surely what he did. And King Charles is calling to reinvigorate ties between France and UK. So King Charles and Queen Camilla entered the presidential palace with French President Macron. So looks like they are trying to get into some better relations and all in that space. And Azerbaijan's Alif is apologizing for Russian peacekeeper deaths in Karabakh. So Putin is calling for peace in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, and Russia has been clearly unable and unwilling to deter Baku from regaining control of Nagorno-Karabakh. So that is going on as well. So we're seeing a lot of things going on in the world, and I have to find out from Nick whether these countries are countries that are watching Pod TV and all along those lines. And the Saudi crown prince says in a rare interview, every day we get closer to normalization with Israel. Israel says the framework Saudi normalization deal is possible by early 2024. for. So there looks like that part of the Middle East may be coming into a situation where they actually get along and all along those lines. But we'll have to see how it goes and what goes on in that space. So that is definitely something that we are seeing in the news and all in that kind of way. So let me see what I've got in the United States news, and then I'll bring in Terry Sizemore as well as Nick and anybody else that has come into the conversation as well. Looks like Trump's criticism of abortion restrictions is out there, and some folks are wondering whether this could impact how evangelicals vote in the Iowa caucus. So Trump, who paved the way for the Roe repeal, faces an abortion blowback from the right. So it looks like he is definitely having some conversations that might be not going the way that some of the evangelicals would like and everything. So we're going to see if this impacts his campaign, because right now he is well in front and all in that space. So we're going to see how this all plays out. And Eagle Pass issues disaster declaration as more than 4,000 migrants are crossing that area over a 2-day period. So over 11,000 migrants have surged across the border in Texas. Over 2,200 were caught illegally crossing the border. So officials are scrambling to respond as migrants overwhelm that particular Texas city and all in that way. And a South Carolina man goes viral after a wild interview about missing 35. He said, I heard a boom, my whole house shook. And now folks are trying to figure out, how did a $100 million F-35 jet go missing? So that is definitely what is some of the conversation. But it looks like the F-35 pilot was ejected from the $100 million jet over South Carolina due to bad weather, as experts reveal why the plane couldn't be tracked. And this is something I know that Nick will be interested in, since he follows the law. A legal battle over political maps in Alabama, Georgia, and Louisiana is taking place, and the Supreme Court will decide if Alabama can openly defy its voting rights decision. So coastal community concerns expose Alabama's duplicity in the restriction fight, according to what some folks are saying, and all along those lines. And I had some friends who were actually watching the hearings with Attorney General Garland. And what I'm seeing in the news is that Attorney General Garland spars with the GOP in House hearings. So they've been going back and forth and all in that space. And of course, they'll continue those hearings as well. And a Wyandotte Ranch is being accused of abusing children, unsanitary conditions, and they will now operate without inspection. So we're going to see what happens in that part of the United States and all in that way. And it looks like grief-stricken relatives of the Chicago couple and their 2 children who were shot dead in their home are speaking out as well. So that is something that is going on as well. And apparently these folks were in Oklahoma. So this is where that incident took place. And it is believed that the suspect is dead in that particular area. But we're going to see if folks have more news around that as well. And Zelensky is making his case at the U.S. Capitol for more war aid as Republican support softens. So it looks like Zelensky is facing a more splintered GOP as he returns to the Capitol Hill looking for more aid. So that is something else that we're seeing. And we're also seeing conversations, speaking of migrants, with things going on in New York and everything along those lines, because apparently 500,000 Venezuelan migrants have been granted temporary legal status as border crisis rises. And Adams, the mayor of New York, has reacted to the Biden administration legalizing thousands of migrants after saying that the crisis will destroy the New York City area and everything. So the U.S. will allow nearly 500,000 Venezuelan migrants to work legally. And I don't think that either Mayor Adams or Governor Huckle seem to be overly pleased with that and everything. And we've been talking about technology. Well, technology had a very interesting moment as well, because a man following a Google Map directions drove off of a collapsed North Carolina bridge and died. So now his family is suing. So I guess they're saying that the Google Map did not do what it's supposed to do, which is kind of warn you of stuff that is going on and all along those lines. So Google is sued for negligence after the man drove off the Calypso Bridge while following those said map directions, and all in that way. So that's some of the news. I'm going to bring in Terry Sizemore, our guest, just for a minute, see what she's got going on. I've also got Lee Newton Rhodes and others that are joining as well. Terry, I know I've had you on before. You are a author, so interested to hear about your field of being an author. But I know that one of the things that your personal book deals with is grief and all along those lines. So you went through your own grief moments and that kind of way. So if you can just share with our news audience a little bit about your story and how you got into the notion of writing about grief.
Well, yes. One of the books that I wrote several, is called Good Grief. And even though I don't know if I've ever felt grief was good at the time, it made me feel alive. I lost a very dear friend. And so in the book, I won't give away all the little details, but it talks about the relationship with that friend and the loss of that friend and all the dynamics that went on and recovering and getting through the grief process. I think it was about 6 months of really hard grief that I went through. And I'm sure that everyone, at least sometime in their life, has experienced loss. And I don't think we're alone. Everyone experiences grief a little bit uniquely, but I think some of it is very common and can be shared. The thoughts can be shared. I've had some very good reviews on the book. One of my clients read it, and she had lost her brother, and she felt like she could really identify with the feelings of loss and where we go from here and things like that. And it's a lighthearted book. It's not, I hate to use the word preachy because I love preaching. However, it's not that way. It's sort of a little story about the author's journey, my journey, actually. I don't really identify myself there, through the grief process and getting to carry on and keep the memories alive and precious in my life from the parties that I've lost. And I've lost more than just one, but it was a great little journey to write that book.
Yeah, it sounds like, and I know one of the other things that you talk about in your book and everything is even some of the own things that you went through in your own family. And I know that you had some family members that were involved in not losing their life and everything. And it seems like it was a very sad story as well. So if you want to share a little bit about that, I'm sure that the audience of World Edition would love to learn about that, because we do hear a lot about our young people that are suffering from kind of the depression and a number of other things. And as I recall, you had family members that were going through that as well. And unfortunately, they did not stay here on this earth and all along those lines. But you can share a little bit about what was going on with your, I believe it was your stepdaughter, if I remember correctly.
Yes, I met my stepdaughter when she was 9 years old, and she was a darling child. I loved her very much, and she went through the divorce of her parents at a very young age. I think she was about 5 years old. So she was very developmentally behind because she had so much to work with. I wrote a book about that experience as well from her point of view, and it was called There's Always Hope, and her journey through the divorce as a young child. And during that time when I spent with her, we engaged in a lot of library activities and children's books. And that's when I just fell in love with children's literature, because not only was it fun for her, she was learning to read, and she was learning things as we picked different projects to do and reading. And so I caught her up, and we played games, and we did a lot of things in life. And then when she was 21 or 22, she had cancer. And so we lost her. But as a small child, she sat on my lap and she gave her heart to Jesus. So I know that she's in heaven, and I know that everyone who loves her is going to see her again. But it has been, I'm sure, a very difficult time for her father and the rest of us, everyone who loved her. And when I came to Florida, I came because my own brother was very sick. And he was only 59 when I lost him. And that's very young. I know there are I lost another brother when he was 20 to an accidental death. But my brother who died a few years back had an autoimmune disease called lupus. And so it was attacking his lungs and he couldn't breathe. And it was difficult to watch him go through that. But the people that we love, we have memories, we have treasured time with them. And since I am faith-based, I believe that I will see them again. But it's hard. It's really hard sometimes to think, yes, my brother's in a better place and he can breathe and he can run and he can do all the things that he couldn't do here in the end on earth. But it's still that hole in your heart that you miss them, and you have to go on with your life and find some more meaning in your life to carry on and continue. And I know my friends have lost spouses and just, other children. I've been a nurse for 43 years, so I have seen quite a bit of loss in life. And we've had some good stories and we've had some very sad stories to weather through. But I'm sure that I'm not alone in those journeys.
Not at all. One of the other things I know that you're very much is part of your life, part of your DNA and everything is your faith, and all along those lines. And I know that one of our panelists that I'll be bringing on very much in the near future, in another minute or two, is also very faith-based as well, and definitely talks about the sense of values and all in that way, that being Lee Newton Rhodes. But I just wondered if you could share a little bit about your faith journey and how important faith is to your own life.
Well, my faith is everything. The Bible talks about God as being our great reward, and He is the most important thing. When I was a young child, my parents had a difficult marriage, and they had divorced once and remarried, and they were going to divorce again. And so it was very difficult for me because I didn't want to have to choose who to live with. And I understand when that happens. I've watched it in my own family. I've watched it in my stepchild's family. But it was breaking my heart. So I was about 12 years old, and I went into my grandfather's bedroom and I got on my knees and I prayed that my parents would not get a divorce. And so I remember feeling a very different sensation come into the room, which now I feel was the Holy Spirit come into the room to confirm that God was going to answer my prayer. But I didn't really know God. I had only been raised in a church that didn't really teach me about a personal relationship with God. So He was some scary being way out there, if He even existed. So it was odd, I guess, that I decided to pray to a God I didn't know. But I got off my knees, and within a year, both of my parents gave their lives to God and they became Christians. And I thought, they're weird. My parents are so weird now. But then it was over about a year that God just worked on my heart. And A.J. Tozer, he wrote a book called The Pursuit of How God Pursues Us. And he did. And I was very young. I was 14 years old when I went to a church, and I thought, I want what these people have. They're happy and they know the living God. And I thought, I want to know Him too. So I got on my knees in that church and I prayed and I gave my life to God. And that was over 50 years ago. It was April 13th, 1973. And so I celebrated my 50-year anniversary knowing God. And through that, there's been a lot of ups and downs and here and there. And I did not realize that I had a lot of inner turmoil issues. And I went through, in 1983 to 1988, I went through a 5-year period of suicidal depression. And I was surprised what a very negative stigma that carried. People sort of shunned me and didn't want to know me, but the period, it was very real. It was awful to have all of those feelings. And it was then that God had showed me how to make my pain my pathway to Him, and that He had it all planned out before the foundation of the world. And His word was wonderfully healing to me. It said that the punishment that was needful for me to obtain peace was put on Jesus that day, that they crucified him, and the words that God gives us the victory through Jesus Christ. And I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ, because it's the power of God to salvation. And it was the power for me to be set free from this horrible, horrible pit of depression as God healed me, restored me. And every single day since November of 1988 has been a gift to me, because I was in great danger. And I'm sure every day of life is a very big gift to everyone. But because of that, I have learned to know him in a way I don't think anything else could have helped me know him the way that I do. And a lot of times we curse the darkness, but we don't want anyone to light a candle either. And that kind of is a concern to me. I know that I wrote some devotional books called Lighting Candles, and I have 3 of them. And they're just little quips about God and prayer and faith and how big God is, and really seeing him and seeing his word for the power that it has in our lives. And it doesn't matter what we face every day, whether it's loss or grief or sorrow or mixed emotions or anxiety or worry about the future. God, in my opinion, in my life, has been the answer to everything. He has an answer in his word for every single thing that we experience and go through. And I never thought I could thank him for the pain that I felt in my life and the difficulties, but I do, because at the end of Job, what God says to Job is he's God, and I'm not smarter than God. I'm not kinder than God. I'm not more loving than God. He is the ultimate in everything. And I am so blessed to know him. And the thing is I guess there's a movie that Woody Allen made a long time ago. I don't know if it's called Sleepers. And in that movie, it was a futuristic thing, and they looked back at the life of things that happened in the past, and they were kind of laughing and mocking, and they said, there was this man named Billy Graham who said you could have a personal relationship with God. And that struck me as being odd, because that is true. God is very personal. He knows each and every one of us personally. And I see him every day, every moment of every day. I could talk for a million hours.
Along those same lines and everything.
Yeah.
Definitely going to bring Lee Newton Rhodes in and everything. But one of your other authors as well actually deals with another subject that we talk about often, and is actually around Ukraine, because I know you have an author with your publishing house, and you actually have a illustrator that is in Ukraine, and actually in Ukraine in the middle of the war. So I'm actually going to bring Sasha in as well. But it sounds fascinating that you are able to work with this woman from Ukraine while she is dealing with the bombarding of her city and all along those lines. So I just wondered if you could share, one, how you came into a relationship with that young lady, and also how you are working with her as a illustrator for your book publishing company, because I do know that in our conversations that you had mentioned that you have a illustrator that is literally working with you on several of your children's books that is literally right there in the middle of the war.
I have 3 of them. I have Anna, I have Marguerite, and I have Nadia. And Nadia is a refugee to Poland, but Anna and I keep in contact with them all the time. And I think they have to tell me they're okay. They do tell me that they hear the war all around them, that sometimes they have no electricity and they are in cold, unheated buildings, and that they are afraid for their lives, but they are managing, and they recover, and then they get to work some more. And they said that their artwork with my books and what we're doing kind of helps them to have some hope getting through this terrible situation that their country is facing. But yes, I keep in contact with them on a weekly to daily basis to see how they're handling the conflict in their country.
Yeah, definitely. Everything. Well, definitely that's just some of the questions I had for you and everything. And definitely you just share a little bit about how you got involved in children's authorship and everything. And then Lee and others may have questions for you as well. And then, of course, we'll get to other items on the news as well. But definitely you just talk a little bit about your children's book journey.
My children's books? Well, they started with my stepdaughter. And then I just adore children's literature. So I have over 100 children's books published. I have some fun books about portraits, little boys wanting to fly into space. I got to watch the glare there. We have some Christmas books. They're some of my very favorites. Won an award for In Search of Christmas. The 3 search and rescue dogs are searching for Christmas for their owners that feel that they've lost Christmas. The illustrator, I believe, was in India and did a really nice job of capturing how the dogs were traveling the globe to find Christmas. And they did find Christmas in a little town called Bethlehem, where they were reenacting the first Christmas. And so we have tons of fun things. We have a thoroughly modern grandmama, which is really cute. I think that's actually based on an actual grandma author that I have in England. We have the TV Mouse, which is just a lot of fun, also illustrated by my Ukrainian artist. And we have educational books. We also have books that have a soft message. This is an award-winning book by Joy McKay, who was a dancer in New York, moved to Texas. And she wrote a book because she felt that everyone should be able to enjoy things, regardless of if they fit the mold or not. And I think that's a good idea. We have Thankful ABCs, The Golden Rule. I have an author who wrote Roman is Bigger about emotions and seeing emotions. I have The Little White Kitten, an award-winning book, and Her Little Red Mittens, about a young kitten who loves her mittens and loses them, but finds a way to have fun even in the middle of sadness and loss, and learns the value of giving and sharing. And all kinds of different things, educational things about turtles, frogs, crabs, squids, the Midnight Zone, all kinds of educational things. And they can be found at my website at bestlittleonlinebookstore.com. And there is a list of all the children's books in the bookstore. So we have a variety of everything. One of my authors has 2 autistic children, and she wrote a book for her boys called Fairies, Not All Fairies Are the Same. And it just talks about how we don't all have to be the same. We can all be unique and different. And I also have fun things for families to do. The Little Book of Big Ideas, crafts, activities, celebrations, so that families and kids can find something fun to do any day of the week.
Yeah, it sounds like it, Terry, and everything. Lee and definitely Sasha, like you said, heard she's got Ukrainian illustrators. And Lee, I know that one of the things you oftentimes talk about is how we have lost some of the sense of values around the United States and maybe even around the world as well. So I didn't know if you had any questions or thoughts for our author friend and everything before we get into some of the other news stories. And same for you, Jacoby, because you're in the esports lane and everything along those lines. So any thoughts or observations or questions that you had, either you, Jacoby, or Sasha?
Well, I think we all have a choice, and our children's hearts are in our hands. And so I think every day and every moment we spend with them, we make the biggest impact on our children than anyone else in the world. And yes, even I heard your news, and there's chaos everywhere, and there's conflict, and there's difficulty, and it's all over and around us. But in our homes and in our private lives, we have the ability to make every day wonderful, and we can face every day with the joy of a child, and the courage of a giant is my go-to little thing to do every day. And that's what we encourage. And anyone who would like any help with a book they need published, I have services for that, or I partner with people to publish a book that means something to them as well.
Yeah. Well, good morning, Terry. First, welcome to Pod TV. I just want to pick up on something you were talking about before, grieving and faith. It can be very therapeutic, but as we all know, unfortunately, sometimes the answer is no. And unfortunately, sometimes dear ones, loved ones die, whether children, spouses, friends, what have you. Do you want to speak to that? Because that can be very tricky sometimes.
Well, I do understand that. And like I said, we're no stranger to loss. I had a darling brother who was climbing a radio tower when he was 20, and his friend fell to his death. And my brother wanted to help him. So he went down the guide wire, let go too soon, and he fell to his death as well. So that and losing my brother as a youngster, and I taught nursery school, was my very first job out of high school when I was 16 years old. And one of my little 4-year-olds drowned in his backyard swimming pool. And I can tell you that there are no easy answers to difficult questions. I do not peddle easy answers to difficult questions. We come into this world to no effort of our own, and we leave that way as well. And some people get a lot of years. I have an author I told Mr. Lee about yesterday who is 100 years old, and she's wonderful. She has a little hard time hearing, but she's writing books. She owns businesses. She owns property. She's very vibrant. And then I saw a little tiny coffin of a 4-year-old baby who, and I did nursing as well. So I've seen some babies born with some difficult things, and I cannot peddle easy answers to difficult questions. I know that it is heartbreaking. Again, the only thing I can say is I wish and pray for everyone to make their pain their pathway to God, and to somehow find a relationship with God in the middle of that pain and agony that becomes meaningful to them, because somebody down the way is going to need them to hold their hand too eventually. And but I do understand the terrible loss. And my mother, according to my mother, has never gotten over the loss of my brother, and that was 43 years ago. And when it was 28 years, and I called her every day on May 17th, because that's the day we lost my brother. I'd say another year, and I'd say it's been 28 years, and she said, I didn't think I could live that long. And so you cannot look in the face of a mother who has lost their baby and know how that grief could hit them. I don't know how to tell them to carry on or to find a way, but the world still needs us. The world still needs them, and
just really quickly along those same lines, what advice do you give to your Ukrainian illustrators? Because like I said, one, how did you find the Ukrainian illustrators? And they're in the middle of that horrible war and all along those lines. So I know that you're in conversation with them regularly. So I was just wondering, what advice do you give to them, whether it's the one that is in Poland or the two that are still there in Ukraine?
Well, I'm not a good one for advice, because advice is kind of easy to do, but I tell them that I'm praying for them every day. I tell them I'm watching the news. I'm praying for the resolution of the conflict. I'm praying for their safety. I've offered them to do anything I could. If they even want to come to my home, I feel like I know these girls personally because we've worked so closely together. They don't feel thousands of miles away in a different country. They feel like my friends, and I'm worried about them. They keep me posted. I met them. There's a site for artists and writers and a lot of different creative things called guru.com. So I'm sorry. It's not Guru. It's Upwork. And Upwork has worldwide artists and writers, and they've done some translating. I've needed translation into Italian and into Spanish. And some of the books that I have been translated, and they help. So this site at Upwork has an unlimited, it's worldwide talent everywhere. And that's where I met the girls. They applied for jobs when I posted them in need for my children's book. But it's been years and years since they've been working for me. And like I said, I love them dearly. I could take them into my home and just put my arms around them and say, no more fighting. We're not doing that here in America, thank goodness, at this time. And I can only imagine, I have read stories from Dietrich Bonhoeffer and C.S. Lewis, who endured war in Germany during the world wars. And so I cannot imagine sitting in a house and hearing shelling all around me. I have thanked God every day that I don't know why I'm so lucky. I don't know why I've been so blessed, but I pray for them with all of my heart for their safety and angels to surround them and not let those the conflict touch them personally, tangibly in a physical way, because they are in danger. And I watch the news. I see what's happening to their cities.
Do you know which
Terry,
cities
are there parts of the country that people are getting back to normal, or schools are open, tourism?
It looks like it. But it looks like they're not actually in schools. The young lady that I know very well, she said she couldn't leave because her husband couldn't leave, and if they were going to be affected, they wanted to be affected together. And she loved him, and she didn't want to leave, even if it meant losing their lives. Nadia is a single girl, so she fled to Poland, and she's safe with a Polish family. And Anna feels like she seems to be out of the direct conflict. It seems like it's in certain areas, and it's not exactly hers. She hears the bombing very, very, very far away from her. But yes, I think some of them have electricity. They're working. They're going to hospitals. One had some surgery on her ear. So some things seem to be continuing normally for the country, but I don't know where.
Jadovi, any thoughts or questions? Same for you, Nick, and everything.
I guess to touch back on the grief, or to stay on the grief issue, which yes, I mean, there are, to each his own is how, people deal with grief, and that well. And I, not only your books, but I think there are some films and shows that actually touched on grief really well also. But it's interesting just to, I guess, learn other ways individuals deal with grief. So I guess what are some very interesting, unique ways that you have seen those that you've talked to deal with grief?
Well, I have seen people do memory books. I had a lot of memories with my friends in the Florida Keys. So sometimes they'll go to visit those sites. They'll make little memorials. They'll do podcasting like this and talk to other people who are grieving. They join grief support groups. I know my girlfriend, her husband was a quadriplegic. He was injured in 1981 in California, where he tried to jump off a second-story balcony, caught his foot and landed head first and broke his neck. And they were personal friends of mine for my entire life. And so I watched her care for him and love him for over 35 years as a disabled quadriplegic. And he succumbed to pneumonia. A few months before my brother died, he died, and grief hit her. And obviously she was with this man, what was like her whole life. So she cared for him, and she would come home and she cried, and she would remember saying, "I'm home," and he's in the other room. And so all of the normal routine things, I see people usually try to preserve those. They preserve the pictures, the belongings, the things they did with those people for as long as they need to, till the great sorrow gets a little better. We never stop missing the people that we love, but the sorrow does eventually lift. The psychiatrist that I used to listen to on the radio many, many years ago said grief is usually profound, can be profound for about 6 months. If it goes longer than that, you should try to have somebody help you with it a little bit, like a therapist or a friend or a support group. But I think that 6 months is not long enough for a true devastating loss. I've seen a year up to even 2 years be pretty hard. I mean, people are functioning and they're going to work. And I remember right after my brother died, we had planned a trip to the Keys, and the hotel wouldn't give me a refund. So I said, well, I'm going to go. And I went down, and I was listening to all the music we listened to, and I got there. And then when I got there and I was walking through the streets of Key West, I was devastated. I think all of the devastation just hit me like a ton of bricks because everyone was laughing and having fun and carrying on. And where was my brother wasn't here. My brother was supposed to be here and we were supposed to be having fun again and we weren't, and he was gone and I was at a loss. And I remember telling one of his friends lost his wife just shortly. My brother died in June and his wife died in July. And I said, yes, after the funeral and after all the I'm sorry's and after all the cards and the services, everybody else goes on with their lives. And there you are with this, what do I do now? And you're right. Everyone handles that differently. Some people like to be busy. Some people, my girlfriend lost her husband to cancer. And she said, 5 days later, I said, well, maybe I should take a shower, maybe tomorrow, and we laughed about that afterwards. But that's how devastating. She just couldn't get off that couch, and slowly but surely people get back to a routine that feels like we're going back to normal, even though normal doesn't seem to happen again. It's a new, different way of working through life and carrying on. And you're right. I mean, there are parents, when they have other children, they're kind of thrust right back into life when they lose one of their children or their spouse, and they have children to take care of and brothers or sisters or parents. And sometimes busy's good, sometimes busy's not as good. You know what I mean? So it is a very individual thing. And I think that the way we can be friends to somebody who's grieving is to ask them, what do you need from me as a friend? Do you need to talk to me? Do you need me to take you out shopping? Do you need me to take you on a river and look at nature? Do you need me to sit here and cry with you? Do you want to talk to me about the person you loved? Go ahead. Tell me the same story 50 times. Tell me how like my brother ran across the 7-mile bridge from Marathon to Knights Key. And he did that all the time. And he told me the story over and over. And I think it's just finding out what that person needs and where they're at with their grief, because you really don't want to lose anyone in grief, And I look at these war-torn countries. These people are losing people that are so important to them every day. They're becoming widows and orphans, and it's tragic. It's tragic to see that happen in the world.
Just to touch on one of the artists that has actually done I think a phenomenal job with. Well, there are a couple of things in terms of, your book is phenomenal. I think your book dealing with grief is phenomenal. I think there are some other artists also that have done a good job with trying to portray grief to help people overcome.
Sure.
For example, Disney had WandaVision, which was the whole show was about grief and dealing with loss. And it was her basically recreating a world in her mind mentally about the individual that she lost. One of the young artists today, which I think is a phenomenal artist as well. His name is Ren. He's a guitarist. I don't think he's Australian, but he might be British. But either way, he's phenomenal artist. He actually did a song called Suicide, and that song talks about his friend that he lost, and it really tells a dueling story. Throughout the first part of the story, it tells the story of how he believes his friend felt and tried to justify in his mind why his friend took his life. And then at the end of the song, he tells why his friend hurt him so bad by taking his own life. So it's a really good song. I'd recommend anybody check it out because it's also a great song about grief.
Yeah. Nick, you had a question?
Well, I was wondering, Terry, what city do you live in?
Well, I'm from the Cleveland, Ohio area, but now I live in a little city called DeLand, Florida. It's between Daytona and Orlando in Central Florida.
I've been to DeLand. I'm from Florida, so I know. I've been
Which
to
part?
almost every city. In Tampa, Florida, I have about 2,000 relatives, maybe more.
Wow, yeah,
So we settled here in the 1800s.
nice.
It was really a city. Of course, in this whole issue, I'm pretty practical about it. I mean, dead people have no pain, basically. So once
Yes.
they're gone, there's no pain. So the only people that yammer about it are the live people. And
Yeah.
life is for the living, and living people are the ones that create the problems and have the problems.
Yes.
But you also touched on parental unit problems. Now, very interesting, Putin, okay, who obviously has some mental issues. Otherwise, he wouldn't invade Ukraine. Do you think his parents are responsible, just like Hitler's parents are responsible for their adverse behavior or abnormal behavior? Or would you say it's a mental defect that some of these people have? And I'll throw Putin in with Stalin and Hitler. What are your thoughts on that?
You know, that's an interesting statement because I want to go back to the suicide thing. And the suicide breaks my heart because I was suicidal. And I know I was close to doing that. And I think every day, by the grace of God, I didn't. So I do know exactly how that person felt in those desperate moments. And I wish that they could find the hope to not have to deal with that anymore. And it breaks my heart. But the reason that I was suicidal was because I held anger against, and I love my parents dearly. I have resolved those issues, but we were battered children. And so I think that it's easy to point a finger at somebody else. And the Bible says, woe unto those who cause these little ones to stumble. And so there is a very gracious Jesus being very harsh to individuals who cause children to stumble and to suffer and to make bad decisions later in life. However, we each at the end of the day make a choice. So I had pain inflicted upon me that was not my fault, and I had a lot of issues to deal with. But where the problem came is when I held anger against them for their actions. So there was a twofold thing going on with my suicidal depression, where I had to be forgiven for my hatred and anger against offenders, but yet I had to let them go. I had to not allow my forgiving them meant that they did not have to be judged on their causing me as a little one to stumble. And so yes, I think that Putin, when I look at people like Hitler and Putin, something had to go terribly wrong. I see well-adjusted, healthy people do not do these things. They do not act this way. So there's something broken, but it appears that there's something broken in all of our hearts in some way or another. And that's why, in my opinion, we all need the cross. We all stand at the foot of the cross in need. So yes, I can't blame his parents because he's responsible for himself. And at the end of the day, the choices he makes. Are they a result of someone else's actions? Possibly, most likely.
Terry, what are your thoughts about mandatory mental health evaluations? I believe in our colleges, universities, and even where you work, they don't have them. Yet this can become very important. I'm a mental health wimp. To give you an idea, I moved to a big house because my townhouse had elected these crazies. I think they are homeowners association crazies. And I knew they were going to drive me crazy because I'd sat on the board with them before. And mental health to me is very important. So now I have a beautiful view overlooking the 15th golf course rather than having to listen to these people yammer about incredibly stupid things. But what are your thoughts about mandatory mental health evaluations? It looks like, at least when I was growing up, they didn't have them. And they may not even have them today. Yet it's important, if not more important, than your physical health. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree with you 100%, but I'm not sure how that would be carried out because
Just like a
I,
physical. How hard is it? You know,
well, I think people are very
whenever you
good
take
at,
a physical, they never do a mental check on you. Yeah, that's like stupid.
no, but you have to be with somebody for quite a little while to know that they are struggling with certain issues. No one knew what I was going through. No one knew that I could. I mean, I went to veterinary school. I was in veterinary school when this happened to me because it was 1983. I entered veterinary school in 82, and there was only one teacher that knew I was in trouble. And he was wonderful to me. He says, come to my office. And I said, I can't. I couldn't talk. But he's the only one. And I was a mess. So you're talking about, and yes, a trained professional may have been, but I'm not even sure about the trained professionals because I hit a lot of different counseling offices that did not address the real problem of my anger issues. It was everything but, I didn't pray enough. I didn't visit enough widows. I didn't think highly of myself. They went on and on and on. So the professionals weren't even that helpful. But I did catch a couple of counselors that knew exactly what was wrong with me. And there was a Methodist minister who wrote the book that saved my life. And it was Healing for Damaged Emotions. And I called him and I said, are you David Seamans? And he said, yes. And I said, you wrote the most gracious words that any suffering person could ever read. And he said, well, thank you. And then I started to cry. And I said, I want to know why I believe every single word your book says. And I still wake up every morning crying. And he said, honey, you want something to change in 15 minutes that took years to happen to you. And those were the most gracious words and the truthful words that somebody could give me. So when I look at people that I work with, I've never been an alcoholic or had any substance abuse issues. And they always say it takes one to know one. And so when you've struggled with the issues that I have, I think I can see it. I don't think I'm making it up. I think I can see some of the struggle in the people around me. But number one, they don't want help a lot of times. They don't know how to get help, and they're using medication to help themselves. So we've become a world, instead of getting to the problem and getting the problem helped and solved and going on, we throw a lot of medication at them. And because that's what they do. But that's your medical professionals doing that too. So when you want to evaluate, I don't know very many people who don't have some sort of anxiety, to be honest with you. I mean, I'd love to tell you that my life is anxiety free. And I know that I have less than I did, but we live in a world where people are worried about money, their homes, their families, their kids, what they're going to do tomorrow. So I agree with you that we have a world that sometimes it feels like it's spinning out of control, but they also don't want to hear about God, and they don't want God to tell them what to do to fix it either. And yes, I think that it's a difficulty, and I know that you've identified it, but what to do about it, I'm not really.
Well, see, I think you're really underestimating what the value of a really trained psychiatrist can do, and also what the advances are in medicine. And you're in the medical profession, so you know that they're doing scans on people's brains to determine their ability, how much of potential mental illness you suffer from because of what they're able to do on brain scans today. So having a mandatory mental health evaluation, I think, would be helpful. Now, spectrum, of course, you may be in the first standard deviation, second standard deviation, but once you get to the third standard deviation, a trained professional should be able to make that determination and make a reference. Now, let's say you didn't have one, zero, they don't exist, which I believe they don't exist anywhere today because, from what I understand, your employer doesn't have one. They don't do the education. Then there's no way you can catch it. In other words, you have no ability to catch anybody. And I'm talking about people that are potential murderers, people that are a little bit loony. You have no way to catch them because we're not doing any evaluations at all. Yet we continually, at least in every year, do a health evaluation, and they take down all the metrics they can possibly take down in health. And then when it comes to mental health, we do zero, which is a big mistake, which is one reason we do see a lot of the crimes around the United States right now.
Hey, Nick, I got a question for you. And I want to know your thoughts around this, and maybe anybody else on the panel as well. But how would we get the definition? I think that's what Terry was alluding to and everything, because, like I said about terrorism, one man's crazy is another man's sane, because I think that there are a lot of people that might be perceived as being crazy because they are different. I mean, half the creative community could probably be labeled as insane and all along those lines just because of the nature of their creativity. And I think Toby can probably even agree with me on that as well, and all in those lines. But how would we define what is the true method of mental instability?
Well, Mark, it's like physical. In other words, the thing is, you're on a spectrum. In other words, like I have asthma, but how bad is it? In other words, I may be in the first standard deviation, but not third standard deviation. And same with mental health. You could be bad, but how bad really is it? And that's what trained physicians, clinical physicians.
Nick, I'm sorry, with physical, you can measure someone's weight, their heart rate. There's certain things you can measure.
That's right. There's a lot
How
of
do you measure mental, though?
There's a lot of you can do on mental health too, ranging from MRI scans today to basically clinical assessments. In other words, so there's a lot you can do. But let's say you don't do anything, which is what the situation is right now. Okay, you can die of a heart attack, Lee, because no one ever looked at you at all to say, hey, your blood pressure is high. Hey, Lee, your cholesterol is high.
Physical's voluntary.
Hey, Lee,
I get that.
Physically, you're obese and you're having all the metrics. If no one looks at you, then the thing is no determination can possibly be made. What we have in the United States right now is, here's what we're doing with mental health. We don't even see it.
What would you say?
Right.
What ages and how often?
Hold on.
Every year. I mean, just like
every year.
Every year, you got to do
your. Toby had a thought.
Nick is right. There are actual metrics for mental health. And there are different systems that are put in place that can be utilized to, gauge mental health, mental capacity from the scans that Nick talked about. But as well, there are questionnaires. There are a ton of things that they do, and that can be done in the mental health arena. We truly don't. We see physical health and we see that. The problem with our society is that we see, if we don't see it, we don't think about it. If you take, as a simple analogy,
Jacoby,
what you got?
I just quick question for you. If it's mandatory and we have HIPAA laws, does the government get to see it? Do employers get to see it?
Well, that's true. I have another question for Nick, though.
The results. Go on, Terry.
I have done psychiatric nursing myself, so I am trained in psychiatric evaluation. So there's no doubt about that. However, we have an entire homeless population, and they tell me that the majority of the homeless are mentally ill. And so we have put them on the streets, and I don't know what you want the system to do about them, because the system is overwhelmed. And even when I was doing psychiatric nursing, sometimes they put people back in the home that didn't take their medication. There was nobody to monitor that. And so the schizophrenia and the bipolar issues were out there, but there was nobody monitoring that. So you want a defective system to identify them, treat them. What do you want them to do with them? Because it's not working what they're doing now. And they have seen so many put back into the environment. And I'm not saying we should do nothing, but if we're going to have a plan, what do you want to do with my coworker who's OCD? Do you know what I mean? Is that that's mental illness too? I watch her. She flitters around. It's really hard to keep her focused. And I'm thinking, I have to do this surgery and see this patient and do this. And I can multitask because I've been doing it all my life, but I cannot rein her in. Should she be in a mental hospital? I don't know about that. But
I think that's an extreme example.
Well,
Well,
The reason being, you're saying
she
that
may not
at
be so far on the spectrum so that you
Yeah.
can't operate in that work environment. So you're gonna have to take each case by case.
But it's
yeah,
not that.
and I think
Hold on a
what you're
second,
pointing
Jacoby
out
and
is
Nick.
more
Hold
so
on
a
a second,
problem.
Jacoby and Nick. It's not at an extreme because I can tell you that when
No, but
I was
Mark,
at measurement and there was a we were physically at the office instead of being remotely. There was a woman similar to what Terry is talking about. As a matter
the
of fact, I think there were
reason
two women that were grabbing like the Clorox wipes and everything, and yeah, they were sometimes a
there,
distraction factor because they were OCD.
the
That was somebody who was
reason that
in
it's an
a office
extreme
with hundreds of
example, the reason that it is an extreme example is what Nick just said. Because there are you don't need to take everybody who has an OCD or ADHD or ADD or even autism and throw them in a mental facility. You can find that's where the whole understanding of like if I've got a broken finger, does that mean I am going to be locked in a bed for the rest of my life because I've got a broken finger? We know the extremes on seeing the physical, but we don't know or understand as much on the mental side because we don't focus on that. And again, I don't like to really bring in personal situations into conversations like this because it's more of an anecdote than it does help anything. I mean, I have a child with a mental disability. So I do know for a fact that there are scales that they actually have to work with individuals on. So I do know for a fact that you do have to fill out paperwork. They do have medications, but you don't have to force kids on medication. There are ways of helping individuals with mental disabilities. And every mental disability is not one that a person cannot work with. And so saying that, oh, well, a person has his OCD and, oh, well, should she be in a home? No, if she is able to work, then it's just fine. It's manageable. It's one of those things that we need to look at because those individuals on the streets, honestly, that was one of the things that New York did. New York kicked all their mental patients out of the hospital and then threw them on the streets. And that created the actual homeless problem that started in New York. So there are issues within our system that we need to fix. Yes, it's a flawed system, but we cannot run from that system because we need to throw more money into mental health. We need more beds. We need more teachers, more students, more nurses, more doctors in the mental health arena rather than running from it and saying that it's a broken system or that, well, I can't see it. So, hey, they're going to be okay. That's not the way it works. And
Fix it.
We have to fix it. It's one of those things that's a detriment on our society the more we avoid it. So again, I mean, there are metrics and there are ways that we can work with it.
Well, I understand what you're saying, but what Nick's question to me was the people that he was listening to talk were driving him crazy because they were talking about nonsensical things. Well, those people aren't the people that I met in the psychiatric ward. I met the schizophrenics and the manic depressives and some of the people that were capable of extreme crime, things like that. So every day we're around people that may just irritate us a little bit.
Yeah, and there are those individuals that irritate us, but again, it's not just because they irritate you doesn't mean that they have a mental disability.
No, I
agree. And I think that's where learning about the different mental disability or mental issues that are out there. We talk about the autism spectrum all the time. That is a gauge on the ability of somebody with autism. That's literally a check in figuring out where on the spectrum you lie. We can do that with other mental issues. We can find out more about ADHD. We can find and not just judge and say, okay, this kid is hyperactive. That means he has ADHD. Or, oh, this kid just gets distracted too many times. Oh, well, that means he has ADHD. No, that's what we do generally. But we really need to crack down and figure out, okay, what are the what is that mental capacity of that individual? What draws them to do these things?
But
What can we build around
what
that?
you're saying, but Jacoby, along those same lines, and I'd love to hear Lee's thoughts around this, and we got a few more minutes so we can go over a little bit and everything. But aren't we sometimes quick to make assumptions? I mean, I am sure, and I don't know this for a fact because I haven't watched enough of the news coverage of the reaction, but I am sure that there were people that will be bringing up Biden's mental faculties because he bumped into a flag and everything. He could have been anxious. It could have been an anxiety moment and everything. But there are people that are watching that incident that will blow it out of proportion, that will be bringing up his mental capability, his mental faculties, and a number of other things. We've seen that with other incidents. And like I said, the flag could have been misplaced. He could have been anxious. There are a number of things that could have been factors
That's
that
the
you don't
point.
think about.
That's the point. The more educated we become in understanding that him bumping into a flag, he was just not paying attention and just walked into it, or that he could have been anxious and ran around it.
Right.
Us understanding and becoming more educated on mental disabilities and what it actually is, and what mental capacity and what mental disabilities and all that stuff, what that really is, the more we can get away and battle these really just ridiculous notions that, oh no, he fell down the stairs, his mental capacity is gone because he can't see stairs, the dude just fell down, he tripped. We all trip.
Yep.
Yes.
Lee, you're on
So Toby, there's a point though. If someone trips once, I got you. But if they're doing it daily, then we have a concern.
Yeah.
I'm not saying this
Yeah.
is Biden. I'm just saying in general. That's when we
Again,
start noticing things with family members, when it's repeated activity.
Yeah, exactly. I understand that. And that's where the whole education portion comes into play. If we are not educated on that situation and we turn a blind eye to it and don't even listen to it and are doing what Mark had talked about, just that quick judgment. Oh, it's ADHD. I know. What? Because he searched on Google at one time? No, it's the education of it and understanding the whole situation. Then, yeah, I mean, if they're bumping into something every day, yeah, I mean, it could be something that has to be looked at.
Jacoby, you're a little young for this. Mark would appreciate this. Sometimes people forget things. So they'll say they're having a senior moment.
Exactly.
Well, another thing that comes to mind is, I often wonder why a certain person like Michael J. Fox has Parkinson's, or, why somebody who looks like they've lived a pretty good life has something that devastating, or someone else has diabetes like Mary Tyler Moore. And I'm not saying that God inflicts them on purpose, but it's really hard, it seems like, for us as human beings to have sympathy and empathy for other people if we've never suffered those things. So Alzheimer's is a very personal thing to me because of my grandfather and watching my mother's mental ability start to decline as well. And so, but other people who haven't been, around that, it doesn't really mean a lot to them. But we seem to campaign on the things that do strike us in our own lives. And it's unfortunate that it takes something like autism to make us want to spread the word about it and have everybody know about it. Or like you said, I look at these homeless people and I think, doesn't anybody love you? My brother's 55. My other brother's 55 years old. He had a stroke, and me and my mother are taking care of him, and we're he is a total care patient. There's no way we would have ever left him with his issues on the street, and they have caused him to need us even more now. So I look at others and I look at their lives, and the Mothers Against Drunk Driving, if their children weren't hit by a drunk driver, would they have campaigned so furiously for the cause? And I'm not saying it was a good thing that happened to them, but they took their difficulties and what hit them in life, and then they go to help other people.
And we just saw that recently.
Spot on, Terry. That is what people do, is because a lot of people don't really experience particular things. And in all honesty, it takes other individuals who haven't had that experience to get movements going. For example, and for the civil rights movement, the minority community is only 17% of the population at that time. It's gotten a little bit, I mean, it's real low. So as many Black folk could have gotten out on the streets, it still would not have changed because the majority of the population was roughly about 60 to 70% Caucasian at that time. Yes. And without those Caucasian individuals helping out and standing up and empathizing with those marching, nothing would have changed. Women's March, had the women not had, and trust me, I will stand behind women all day and hopefully back them and help them out as much as I can. But truthfully, in the women's marches and the women's fights with women's rights and so on and so forth, had those men not begun to empathize and help out with that march, that's not going to change. Those individuals suffering from shootings, had individuals not campaigned and fought along, we're not going to have change unless more people jump up. Because right now, 85% of the population wants background checks universal. But until, those individuals really begin to empathize with those individuals that suffered loss. Everybody talks about, and jumping back to autism, there are other mental disabilities besides autism. And a lot of those get left out because we talk so much about autism. And that deals in the actual insurance and the medical realm. And with those individuals in autism helping out those with those other mental disabilities, or those other parents who have children with mental disabilities, without those parents, trust me, those individuals will still get left out in the cold. So it takes others to have empathy. And that's one of the things that we're losing, is empathy for others.
Empathy is definitely something we got to have more of in everything. And definitely, who among us has not, because it was one of the news stories I mentioned earlier in the day, who among us, whether you are a driver like most of you are, or a non-driver like I am, and everything, we have still managed to get lost using that lovely Google map and everything. But now that this suit is going on, that may create an empathy movement and everything that is going on, where folks will be wanting to know more of the governing of the things that we are using in that space and along those lines. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, whether it becomes a movement around AI or not a movement around AI, because this is the first lawsuit that I had seen of that nature where the person lost their life, ironically, I think here in North Carolina, because they had not had the bridge correctly pointed out and all along those lines and everything. So that could be a whole nother movement, because now we have something that we can empathize with, to your point, Jadovi, and everything. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out and everything. And to your point, Lee, now that I'm in my 60s, I don't make as much of a joke about it because it's closer to the real age of Alzheimer's. But I do remember when I was younger, and some people may have taken it as an offense, but when you were younger and you were having those moments of forgetfulness, then there was the running joke, and I think people still use that running joke of you had early timers, which is kind of a play off of Alzheimer's and everything, because folks would be like, yeah, I've got this state of Alzheimer's going on, even though I have 30 or 40. And I think some of our millennials and Gen Zs still use that joke to this day and everything along those lines. So sometimes we also have to be careful. And I know, Jadovi, you're a comedian and an improv person, but we also have to be careful sometimes of recognizing how the jokes or the humor can impact people and all along those lines. So that's something else that I know folks have to do, even if they're only doing jokes that are in their circle of friends, not doing it professionally and everything. But I know you professionals do it as well.
It's a fine line between joking and bullying.
Right. Yeah. A very fine line between the joking and the bullying, no doubt about that. You're going to get out of here very shortly, but I was going to ask Sasha really quickly if you had any updates around the Ukraine, because she did mention that she had a Ukrainian artist and everything. And I did see, and I mentioned that in the news brief earlier, that Poland is saying that they will not be supplying arms anymore because of the grain fight and all along those lines. So I mentioned that earlier and everything, but I also know that Zelensky is getting ready to have his conversations with Biden and others. So I didn't know if you had any thoughts that you want to bring. And of course, on tomorrow, today is Thursday, we'll have the Ukraine-Russia show as well.
I'd like to mention that last night, Russian had attacked several Ukrainian cities, specifically those that are in the western Ukraine and have nothing to do with the front lines or anything. Several people were killed. A lot of people were maimed. Um, Based on what, I would like to ask you, Terry, you call this a conflict when there is a brazen aggression of one country more bigger, more powerful against another smaller, peaceful country which had absolutely done nothing to provoke this war. Why wouldn't you call it for what it is? Aggression, the genocide. Where comes the word conflict from?
Well, I don't mean to minimize it at all. I'm very sorry if it sounded like I was. I think it's a travesty. I think the world should have come to Ukraine's aid. I think that if we had the ability to do that, we have helped others. Um, I do not understand all of the political arena that happens, but I know that under different circumstances, I think things would be different. Um, I think that we should have made different decisions. I think it would have altered the length of this war, the travesty, the life lost, the I don't know why it has gone on. I don't know why anyone did not step in a bigger way to help that little country. You're right. Ukraine has seemed to always mind its own business, do its own thing. No one deserves that in the world. I watch tiny little Israel get attacked all the time as well, and I would never minimize the severity of what they experience on a daily basis that I do not. I sit in my home and it's peaceful out there. I'm at peace and I'm very lucky and fortunate, but my heart does go out to them in a real way. I think that I don't know how to stop Putin. I see his alliance with North Korea and China. They're parties to be respected and possibly feared, but we are a great nation who has stood by our principles that aggression would not be tolerated. And it apparently is being tolerated, and I don't have an answer for you. And I'm sorry if my words made it seem like I was minimizing my heartfelt sympathy for this small country that does need the world's help. And I watched, I heard so many stories of the world standing by watching Germany do what they did. And the world should not have stood by as long as they did. And the casualties were great. The length of time was great. The whole situation, just should have been dealt with a lot sooner. And I'm almost watching the same thing. They're right. Who wants to watch Russia walk across Europe the way that Germany did? I don't understand war. I just don't understand why people cannot live in peace in their own borders, in their own way. But it seems to be the way that fallen man has decided to live their lives and make their decisions with power and ulterior motives and money. And I don't know what else their motives are, but they certainly don't seem to be of pure hearts, that's for sure. And I look at Putin as a bully and a monster, the way that I felt about Hitler. But we don't know what to do about that. Everyone I know has a heart crying for Ukraine, and we don't know what to do. We can't go there and stop Putin. And we want somebody to help us. I don't know if our military could step in. Brave men that will save the world again, the way that they saved the world in World War II.
Well, that man today is Joe Biden. By supplying Ukraine with ATACMS missiles and F-16 jet fighters, the war would be over in a month, if not faster, because Russia doesn't have defense against this type of weapons. It's period. It's so easy And hopefully, of course, the man is Biden. Of course, he's not healthy man, which he used to be 50 years ago. It's a different man today. He needs a lot of help. But everybody is now hostages to his whims, unfortunately.
Well, I may make a lot of enemies today, but I love ex-President Trump, and I understand that Donald Trump said that if he was in office, this conflict would be over in one day. I
Yeah.
don't know how he could make
Wait,
that.
Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, yesterday challenged Trump and said, if you indeed have a workable plan, please let us know what it is. There is no
I
point
don't
to
think
wait a year and a half.
everyone has interfered with him. I think if this country had cooperated, given him a chance to prove himself as the man he claimed to be, I believe it would be a different thing for us.
But
And
they
I believe he's right. I
they
don't
gave
know
him
how.
a chance.
No, they were impeaching him every 5 minutes.
No,
I mean,
he had an opportunity,
yeah.
and instead of the opportunity, he didn't do what he said he was going to do. So even now, you cannot be out of office and then claim that you have some plan, but then hold that plan hostage as people die. So that in itself is antithetical to anything Christ-like. So that whole claim is no more than hollow air trying to get votes. And it's rather offensive to think about it as, people sit here dying. All you're going to say is, I could stop it now, but I'm not going to, because you know what? You're not going to make me president. So if you make me president, I'll stop it, but not until then. That's offensive and disturbing.
Well, he doesn't have the power to do that. Do you have the power to do it?
Stop it. He said he would have them both in the room and tell them both to cut it out. He can do that without being president. Ex-presidents can still go and talk to national leaders. So his claim is that he could stop it immediately, and he is still friends with Putin because he has Trump Tower in Russia. He can talk to Zelensky because Zelensky is taking calls from anybody. So his idea is no more than hollow words. And to say again that if he has a plan, he'd enact that plan, but he's not going to unless you make him president. So he could actually even call Joe Biden and get that plan enacted. He's telling Congress to shut down, and Congress is shutting down on his words. So it's not that he doesn't have the power or doesn't have the ability. He doesn't have the plan, and he's using that to get blind people to vote for him on that.
I appreciate your opinion on that. And if he doesn't have the ability to execute a military plan to back up his words in another country, then he's not the commander in chief.
He's not. So he didn't even say a military plan. He said he would sit them both in a room and tell them to cut it out. Well,
you have to have something behind your words
he had that when he was president. The problem is, again, he's saying hollow words just to garner votes.
I watched a man,
just as we talked about earlier, about just quick to say things and get people to believe, or quick to do this, like with somebody with ADHD or somebody, that's all he's doing. He's using selling points because he knows that people will just believe him and won't challenge him. If he has a plan, he should provide that plan instead of saying, I have a plan, but I'm going to let those people die until you make me president.
There's another important point is that Trump was talking several times about cutting any help to Ukraine whatsoever, whether it's a military help or financial help or anything. And a lot of his followers, like, for example, what's his name, Vivek Kumar-Sutra or something, they're just following the same thing and talking about the same thing. So how hell, when you have, Terry, so much feelings for Ukrainian people and you have personal friends, you are supporting someone who is talking openly about cutting any help to Ukraine?
Well, I'm not sure if I know exactly how to answer that. And if Biden knew, and he's not even friends with Trump. He's done nothing but degrade him and put him down. I watched Trump work tirelessly at his age, get 4 hours of sleep a night. I never saw a man work
But
more.
what did he do?
And he brought bodies back from Korea. He made the
Biden did that.
economy better. My life was better
Obama
under
did that.
Trump.
All presidents do that.
I can't spar with you every time. You don't
No,
like
but the
Trump.
thing is-
I do. And I think that if he was in office and that they had cooperated with him and Nancy Pelosi wasn't ripping up documents and Adam Schiff wasn't as disrespectful as he was to him,
You're
I
not
think it would have been a different show.
incorrect. He had an opportunity. He has an opportunity now. He's doing a campaign of vengeance. And I get that you believe in Trump, and I get that you really like Trump. I understand that.
But you've
And there are
insulted
plenty of people. There are
insulted my intelligence for doing so.
I didn't insult
And
your
I
intelligence.
think I'm very bright.
I
and
never said anything about your intelligence, Terry.
Everybody I know that
Terry,
supports him is very
I
bright.
did not say anything about your intelligence. I
Well, you
said
did.
nothing of it.
Because what you said is we're fooled into believing this man's
Never use those
lie.
words.
Basically, you did. Now,
Terry, you're inferring things. I have never said those words. I never said fooled.
Okay. Well, I know you think he's had an opportunity. I heard you.
Here's a question then.
He did not have an opportunity.
Here is a question for you. If you had a chance to help somebody who is in trouble, if you had an opportunity to help somebody in trouble, we just talked about empathy. Would you let that person suffer?
That's an unfair question because.
How is it unfair, Terry? He said he has
Let
a
me
plan.
finish, and I will tell you.
Tell me.
That in World War II, they sent a shipload of Jews to New York. Hitler said, even America won't take those Jews. Do you know what? I am ashamed and appalled to tell you that our country turned that ship back knowing they were sending those people to their death. I do not have any power to change that.
So you're comparing Trump to
No,
World
I'm
War
telling
II.
you that you're
I'm
asking
asking
me.
you, if you have the opportunity to help somebody, would you help somebody? If you knew that person, we just talked about suicide. We literally just talked about people committing suicide and how it is good to help people and to talk to people. You are literally telling me that because Trump is so good and he would be so great in office, he would save people. He has literally told you he has a plan, but he will not help with that plan unless he has the power of the office. If he doesn't have that, he's going to let people die.
You know, I heard you. I heard you criticize a man who supposedly can change the world. You hate him. He can change
asking you a question. The
but
man
you're not
said
talking.
He would let people die unless he has the office. That's what he said.
And this is the problem with all of the Trump haters, because what you do.
You haven't changed anything. You're arguing with me that you're telling me how bad I am. I'm telling you literally what this man said. And you cannot argue with what he said. You cannot justify what he said. You cannot even defend it. The only way you're defending it is attacking me. I'm telling you, the man said he has a plan that could save people. He said he's not going to help those people.
I already heard you say that 3 times. I don't need to hear you say that again.
He's letting people die.
But if you had a plan,
I would help people.
Well, I don't know that everybody who could help people is in the ability. It's like, I don't know the answer.
He can't help people.
Well, why isn't Biden? If you think
Biden is trying.
then why doesn't Biden have the same
He
plan?
is trying.
No, tell
Ask
me.
Sasha. Sasha is our Ukraine expert. Biden is actually trying.
By throwing billions of our tax dollars over there for weapons, but no soldiers?
What would Trump do?
Then if he could do it in a day, why isn't Biden doing it in a
Couldn't
day?
he do it now?
No, tell me why Biden isn't doing it
Biden
in a day.
is doing it. Ask Sasha. Sasha's our UK.
No,
Ukraine
you
expert.
tell me, because you're telling me that Trump has a
Trump
plan and he won't
said
do it.
He
but
has
Biden
a
doesn't
plan
even
and
have
could
a
do
plan.
it in a day. Trump
Biden
said
doesn't
he
even
could do
have
it
a
in a
plan.
day.
Hold on a
And
second,
Trump
because
said
I
he
know
would
one of the
let
things that
people
Sasha
down.
said, and we get ready to
And
wind
said
down
he's gonna
very
let people down.
shortly and everything. But one of the things that I know Sasha has said is that Ukraine is actually doing it with the weapons that you're saying that we should send our soldiers in addition. And one of the things I know that Sasha has said, don't want to speak words into your mouth, but I think that you said that we don't necessarily need to send soldiers because the Ukraine forces are doing a good enough job themselves. You just need the weapons. Am I correct, Sasha?
Well, I would like to emphasize that Ukraine can do nothing without Western weapons, finances, training, help, whatsoever. The assistance on a battlefield using intelligence reports or so on. What I'd like to say is that, first of all, Biden never said that he has a plan how to end the war in one day. So therefore, it's unthinkable to ask him to do it if he never claimed that he has a possibility to do so. Now, with Trump situation is, it's not a question of love him or hate him. It's just his track record is he had in the 90s 6 bankruptcies. He again got into the business world in around 2000, losing all his father's inheritance and being minus $250 million. So obviously no American bank would touch him and his whatever business he would have. So how he became so rich and powerful after that? Thanks to Russian mafia money, which were channeled to him through Deutsche Bank, for which Deutsche Bank admittedly paid $36 billion. That's how Trump got on his feet. There is an allegiance to Mr. Putin because Trump was a source of active KGB work back in late 70s and 80s. The first time he went to Russia in 87 and had several trips after that. So obviously he is a Putin's puppy. He publicly announced in Helsinki while he was a president that he trusts Mr. Putin more than his services such as FBI, CIA, and other organizations. He trusts Putin more. Trump had, in the last few years, he had 2 impeachments. He lost House. He lost Senate. He lost presidency. He is pathetical loser. How you can allow a man of this character to become a president of the most powerful country in the world? That's unthinkable. It doesn't work well, especially with his different lawsuits against him. He looking become president just to avoid to responsibility to his several lawsuits, including criminal prosecutions and so on. So if he is not going to become a president, which most likely will do, because look, okay, he controls his base. It's 30%, 32% of the votes, right? He does not control at all the Democrats' voters. They are not going to vote for Trump. So then we are talking about independents who will decide. The independents, looking at Trump's track record, you must say that they're all brain dead if they will vote for Trump. It's not going to happen. Some of them will, but very, very slim minority. That's why Republican Party has a huge problem today. They cannot get away from this Election was stolen. That narrative, which is absolute lie, and which absolutely doesn't help them at all, because Trump was repeating this for the last 4 years, and it's not getting anywhere. So if Republican Party is going to stay on this platform, they will lose next election, and the following elections they will never get to power. This is very dangerous thing. So unless, I don't know, they're so scared of Trump, so maybe they're waiting until he'll go away, he'll die, or he will be put in jail for 25 years. I don't know what Republican Party is hoping for. They locked themselves out of any chances to win the election. So the Trump is a huge liability of a Republican Party today. And unless they will find how to get rid of it, they will keep losing election after election after election. Sorry to say that.
All right. Just really quickly, because like I said, that's their opinions, and everybody has their various opinions on Trump and Biden. I was going to ask you really quickly, Terry, just one other question that was another part of your background and everything, because we did allude to it earlier, but you have a background in a field that is got a lot of respect during the pandemic and everything. So I just wondered if you had any closing thoughts about the importance of teachers and first line responders, because you definitely mentioned that you were a nurse and have done a number of other work in that field. So just as a way to get us out of here, and also if you want to tell folks how about your book and all along those lines, if you can tell your thoughts around the importance of teachers and first line responders, because you did mention that you were a nurse, a veterinarian, and also a teacher. So you've definitely worked in a variety of the first line fields and everything.
Yes, and I drove an ambulance for the city of Cleveland, so I worked with police and fire very closely. And my heart is near and dear to brave men who will go into a burning building to save lives. And so they would bring them out. And every time we needed heavy rescue, we could count on the fire department to send 6 or 8 lovely men to come and help us. In fact, I had a trailer accident with a horse, and the firemen came to help me retrieve that horse out of a fallen, turned over horse trailer. So the first responders are wonderful, and the teachers are wonderful. And so their job, I think, is not too difficult, because the little ones are so eager to learn, and they're so eager to have some fun. And learning and reading should be fun. The picture books that we have with really engaging pictures are fun. There are so many subjects that we cover between, like I said, squids, the midnight zone of the ocean, all the bioluminescent things that are down there. I think teachers can make everything fun. I always did when I was teaching. We had the curriculum that we had to go by too, but we also needed to make learning something that they wanted to do. And even tricking them into having fun isn't such a bad thing to do either, because if you're out in the woods and you're talking about all the different trees and all the different palms and all the different brush, I think that's a fun thing to do with your children too. And we talked yesterday about going to see manatees, or going to aquariums and learning about what's under the ocean, as well as going to the ocean and making every day something we learn a little bit today, and we have a little bit of fun doing it. And I think that's one of the privileges that we have as adults, and we can enjoy it ourselves. I know I feel like I've grown up a million times, every time I get a new group of children to teach, or a new class, or any situation where I can impart a little bit of fun and knowledge. It's a great way to spend the day for me.
No doubt about that and everything. If you can just tell folks how they can reach you and about the books company that you have, and all along those lines, and any final thoughts that you may have as well, and then we'll get out of here and all along those lines. Definitely things can be very interesting. We can have some very respectful conversation, and I hope that you did not mind the tit-a-tat with Jatovia and everything, but it was definitely done in respect and all along those lines. And while we have different opinions on the show, and you will see that if you watch the show on a regular basis, we don't always agree, but at the end of the day, we oftentimes respect each other as well. So just wanted to let you know that as well. But definitely any thoughts that you
I
made.
hope so. I didn't feel like my opinion was as respected as I wished it. It was just my opinion and my thoughts. However, I am a veterinarian, and I do not publish anything with conflict. I try to avoid that. I think people's opinions are personal, and they're entitled to their opinions. But I am a veterinarian, and in all of my travels, I like to help.
You just froze.
No.
She froze. Okay. To tell me why she tries to unfreeze, or maybe I'll see what's going on
I is
there.
for cat. Oh, we
Oh, there
froze.
we go.
And H is for horse. And they're just basic books about animal care. They are filled with many fun pictures of animals doing cute things. If you are a cat lover, you would love all the little pictures of the cats, and the information may be a little boring at moments, but it's helpful to understand your pet. And so if you're interested in that, those are available. And I can be reached at for any publishing needs or any publishing partnerships. I'd be happy to entertain those at sizemore3630@AOL.com is my email address. And the books can all be viewed on bestlittleonlinebookstore.com.
Sounds good and everything. And by the way, Jatovia does have a dog pet. He mentioned the kid, but he actually has 2 kids, but there is a dog that hangs out with him as well and everything. And when he isn't on our new show, he is in the e-game space and esports and all along those lines. So who knows, maybe there can be a video game created around some of your books as well, because that is actually something that he is very much into, is video games, and his sister does voiceovers and acting out of LA and a number of other places. So there may even be some alliances in those spaces as well. Don't want to speak for Jatovia, but I do know that he is always open to business opportunities as well. So I don't think I'm speaking out of school when I say that, Jatovia.
No, always open to everything.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And I know that some things are very sensitive, but I appreciate all of the care and respect. Thank you.
No problem at all. And on that note, we're going to get on out of here, and definitely a fun show. We'll have another World Edition on tomorrow. Don't think we have a guest on that one. We do have a guest on Monday that ironically will be talking about something that you mentioned earlier, because the guest on Monday will be talking about the history around concentration camps and how they might even be playing into some of the stuff that is going on currently with our migrants and all along those lines. But that'll be on Monday's show and all along those lines. But we'll just have a regular conversation with our regular panelists on tomorrow. Don't think there's a guest lined up for that particular show, but we're going to get out of here. Barbara Smith will be having her show coming up at noon. And then at 1 o'clock, we got the Wall Street Hackers. So we've got a number of shows that are coming up, and then we'll have our second episode or third episode actually of World Politics. So actually it's the 4th episode now that I think about it. 4th episode of World Politics on this evening and all along those lines, because those shows are every Tuesday and Thursday, and this will be our second week. So it'll be the 4th episode at 5 o'clock. But right now we're getting ready to get on out of here, and who knows, we may see Jatovia again at 5 o'clock on the World Politics show. But then again, there's a game, so he might not be here because there's a game going on as well. So we're going to get on out of here.
Thank you.